The New York Mets reportedly want to re-sign Edwin Diaz before he even hits the open market. Should they sign him and how much could he get? I'll discuss that on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, Mike Mayer of MetsMerizeOnline.com came out with a report today that was pretty fascinating. It's an article you can find at MetsMerize. Sources, Mets hoping to sign Edwin Diaz before free agency starts. He opens the article by simply saying, sources have told MMO the Mets will make a strong push to sign closer Edwin Diaz before free agency kicks off 5 days after the conclusion of the World Series. Mets owner Steve Cohen realizes the value that Diaz has on the field, as well as the excitement he brings to Citi Field with his narco entrance, and wants baseball's best closer to stay in New York. Now, I did a podcast a couple of days ago where I was discussing all the impending free agents. I talked about the guys that I felt like had played their last game in a Mets uniform. I also touched on the guys I was a little bit unsure of, like a Jacob deGrom, who we spent yesterday's show on, and Brandon Nimmo, who we're going to talk about tomorrow. Edwin Diaz was the one impending free agent that I guaranteed would be in a Mets uniform next year. And this report basically backs up what my gut was telling me, which is that he's too valuable to let go of. And, I mentioned Metsmerize. I used to work with them as one of their editors. Seriously, it is the most comprehensive site that you can find devoted to the New York Mets. And in this article, Mike does a great job kind of outlining the season that he had, talking about how he had 3 consecutive reliever of the month awards in June, July, and August. He had a 1.31 ERA with a 0.90 WHIP, 1.31 ERA, 0.90 FIP, 0.84 WHIP. Struck out 118 of the 235 batters he faced. That's a strikeout percentage just over 50%, which is the third highest ever from a reliever or from any pitcher, and the second fastest pitcher ever to get to 100 strikeouts in a season, needing just over 50 innings to get there. Allowed 34 hits and 18 walks in 62 innings pitched. His 1.31 ERA is the second lowest in Mets history, and his 118 strikeouts ranked second in franchise history for a reliever as well. Remarkable season that he had, and you dive a little deeper into some of the advanced numbers. I mean, his baseball savant page is so red it's bleeding. Fastball velocity, 99th percentile. Extension, 99th percentile. That actually fascinates me. What is his extension? Wow. So you look at his extension on the fastball, 7.3 feet, 7.1 on the slider. So he really shortens the distance to the plate. He's 6'3". And when you're doing that with, a fastball that can touch 101 and average 99.1, and a slider that averages basically 91 miles per hour, that's impossible to hit. And that's why he's striking out, more batters than anyone when it comes to the rate. His expected batting average against is the best in baseball, 149. Expected slugging, best in baseball, 205. WOBA, top in baseball, 205. His expected WOBA, 202. All of that, the top mark in the game. Exit velocity of 85.5 miles per hour. The average, that is in the 96th percentile. Barrel percentage, 93rd percentile. Whiff percentage, 100th percentile. The guy is amazing. He just found a way this year, and we discussed it throughout the season, but he got ahead early, and that was a big, big thing for him, because once he gets ahead, he can start wasting that slider out of the zone, and it's such a hard pitch to lay off of. This year, you look at the whiff percentage on his slider for the season, not just one outing, because you can have one outing where, David Peterson can be whiffing 60% of the batters that he faces on the slider, but that's not over the course of a season. Over the course of the entire year, 54.7% walk or whiff percentage against that slider. So if batters were swinging at it, they were missing over half the time. Fastball whiff percentage is at 41.2%. And it's just impossible to hit those two offerings that he has. It's also funny that Baseball Savant has him registered for a single sinker thrown this year, which I got to imagine that he had, just maybe a bad slider or something, or a fastball that just dove on him. I don't believe that Diaz really throws anything but that straight four seam and his slider. But, he throws the slider 58% of the time, which is just insane. And that's really his bread and butter. That's all he has to throw. And it's led to remarkable results. And that's why you're looking at a pitcher that stands alone in this class. I mean, he is by far the best reliever available, and he's probably the best reliever in baseball. Certainly was this past season. So the only question there is, how much do you pay him? I mean, you look at the Mets payroll and the guys they're trying to bring back. And if we discussed Jacob deGrom yesterday, if that ends up coming somewhere near $40 million or as high as $45 million, depending on how the contract is structured, that's a lot of money. Brandon Nimmo's a free agent that we'll discuss tomorrow. Could he get the George Springer contract of $150 million over 6 years? I think there's a distinct possibility he does. Can you bring these three guys back? And if you do bring all three back, where's the rest of your money going? Is there other money that can be spent? How are you taking this roster that, granted, was great this year and improving it, because you could still bring these three guys back, be paying more for the team next year than you pay for the team this year, and you could lose Chris Bassett, Carlos Carrasco, and Taijuan Walker, not to mention the rest of your bullpen outside of Diaz. And really, where are you? So it's an interesting offseason for the Mets in a lot of ways. Bringing back Diaz makes a ton of sense. I'm all for it. The only thing I'm unsure of is what will the contract look like, and that is what we'll discuss in just a minute. But I don't know about you. Personally, I just hate wearing dress shirts. They're often uncomfortable, whether the material just doesn't feel good on my skin or they don't fit right. I can't find the size that works for me. The dress shirt was due for a radical reinvention, and that's where Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter shirt is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible shirt known to man. It has four-way stretch fabric that provides breathability, flexibility, that leaves you free to enjoy life Thursday away from your commute to work to your 18 holes on the links. It's time to feel confident with a wrinkle-free shirt without the hassle. And with Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles will disappear before your eyes as you stretch and wear the shirt. It's that easy. They also have their Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, which will keep you smelling fresh and clean all day long. On top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. The commuter shirt can get you through your workday and straight into whatever comes next. All you have to do to try it is go to Rhone.com/lockedon. Use the promo code lockedon to receive 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to Rhone, RHONE.com/lockedon and use the code lockedon at checkout. It's time to find your corner office comfort with Rhone. How much money will Edwin Diaz make in free agency? You look at the biggest contracts ever for relievers. Aroldis Chapman, 2016, a 5-year, $86 million deal. Pretty rich, if you ask me. And I wonder if Yankees have a little buyer's remorse on that one. They were so proud of the contract when they signed him to it because they traded him the trade deadline prior, and they brought him back. He was left off of the playoff roster because he missed a practice. So not a good end to that contract for the Yankees, and he's a free agent again. You also have Kenley Jansen with the second largest contract ever for a reliever, a 5-year, $80 million deal signed also in 2016, the same year that Mark Melancon signed a 4-year, $62 million deal. So a lot of big money. Other than that, you had Jonathan Papelbon in 2011 with a $50 million contract, BJ Ryan, a $47 million contract in 2005, David Robertson, a 4-year, $46 million contract in 2014. He is a free agent as well. So you got a lot of older relievers on the market. Diaz is hitting free agency at the right time. He's 28. He'll turn 29 in March. So I wonder what that number will go to. The starting point to me It's 5 years, $90 million. That's the beginning, which is 18 a year. Question is, does he fancy himself the first ever $100 million reliever? If he does, how do you get there? Because if you're telling me it's a 5 year, $100 million contract, while I would not be mad at it, it's kind of crazy to pay a pitcher $20 million. I saw a lot of Mets fans griping about paying Jacob deGrom because how can you pay that guy so much money for such a limited amount of innings? I mean, best case when we look at Diaz's career is he's going to give you like 75 innings. And in a Mets uniform, the high was 62 and 2/3 in 2021, and this year was 62. So you don't know how much you're going to be able to use him. And at $20 million, I mean, this year he saved 32 games. So, I mean, how much is that breakdown per save? What, 800K, 900K? I'm not doing that type of math off the top of my head, but it's a lot. So it's an interesting dilemma that you have right now about Edwin Diaz. I do believe he has to be prioritized. I think they sign him, but it's just how much money does he get? Because again, 5 year, $100 million contract sounds great to him, but 20 million per. Now you start trying to dissect what else you have to bring into this team in the offseason. How do you bring other relievers into the fold when one guy's making that much? I think the way the Mets could potentially get him on a lower AAV, but also, get him the type of money I'm sure believes he deserves to go to a 6 year deal, which I know that sounds crazy. 6 years for a relief pitcher. It's not like this is a position that necessarily ages well, but if you're telling me, let's just say, I'm going to put up the old calculator here. Let's say it's 105 over 6 years. What would that come out to? 17.5. So that would break Aroldis Chapman's average annual value, and you would get him locked up over 100 million. Now, let's say maybe just to get to that number, Diaz is open to make it a little bit less. What if it's 100 over 6? They're talking about $16.6 million to bring Diaz back here. I really am unsure of how that contract is going to break out. I mean, you sign to a 6 year deal, you're basically paying for his age 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 30. So 29 through age 34, I guess. It's not bad. It's not too long into his career. I mean, Aroldis Chapman has still had some success this year, as had Kenley Jansen, and they're in their mid 30s. Craig Kimbrell, not quite as much, but I don't know. It's interesting. You look at Spotrac, their market value that they have listed for Edwin Diaz is just over 16 million. Um, if you say 16.2 over 5, you're looking at just over 81 million. That's not where he's going to get because Chapman already set that bar. Again, I think the floor is 90 over 5. I really do, and I think if you can add a 6 year to the deal, you might get him a little bit cheaper. And who knows, maybe you can even backload that contract a little bit if you want to give yourself some more flexibility in this offseason. But the question is, let's just say the two sides meet before free agency. The Mets offer him a 5 year, $80 million contract, and Diaz is offended and decides, I'm going to test the open waters. Where could he go? And what would the Mets do without him? That's what we'll discuss after a quick word from our sponsors. Where would Edwin Diaz sign if it was not with the New York Mets? Well, pick any contending team, and there you go. Who would not want Edwin Diaz? The New York Yankees would want Edwin Diaz to replace Aroldis Chapman. You look at the Los Angeles Dodgers. They would love themselves some Edwin Diaz. Any team that is trying to be competitive, even the Phillies, they're going to make a lot of money on this postseason run, you would figure. Maybe they spend some on Diaz. The Braves, I don't think that they really have it in their payroll to pay for Diaz and Iglesias. So I think you're safe there because Iglesias is making a pretty nice chunk of change over the next couple of years now that they have taken on that contract. But you never know. You never know what could happen. Edwin Diaz signing anywhere else would be devastating because that bullpen just wouldn't be able to recover. You look at the names available, there's not a lot that you like here. I mean, Aroldis Chapman Kenley Jansen, Craig Kimbrell. Will Smith has a club option for $13 million, so we'll see if the Astros pick that up. You got Zach Britton, Corey Knebel, Will Harris, Trevor May, Taylor Rogers after what turned into a down year, I think, altogether. Andrew Chafin has a player option. Does he opt out? But these guys aren't closers necessarily. That's the big difference here. So I just don't know. Robert Suarez is a $5 million player option. That one's actually pretty interesting. If you can get Suarez from the Padres, I'd like that move. I would imagine he's going to turn down that option. Do the Padres? The Padres are another team that be in on Diaz, to be honest with you, especially if they were to lose Suarez. But Suarez had himself a great season. We saw him, unfortunately, in that wild card round. You look at his numbers: a 2.27 ERA, 11.52 strikeouts per nine. Nowhere near as dominant as Edwin, but he really did not give up much home runs. Did walk a lot of batters though, 3.97 per nine. So he's an option to fill out the pen, but not necessarily an ideal one. And honestly, I'm actually confused by his contract status. But apparently looking at Spotrax, he does have that option. He can opt out, I would imagine there, and he could be available. But again, you look over the market, there's not a closer in sight that I think replaces Edwin Diaz. And so if you lose him, you probably have to trade market. And who's available? Is David Bednar available from the Pirates? There's just slim pickings around the league because a lot of these teams that they have an elite closer who's affordable, that is a great value for them. They want to hang on to that type of a pitcher because, if you're contending and you have an Emmanuel Clase, right, you want to hold on to that guy so he can help you win as you're still, trying to pinch pennies. So Edwin Diaz is maybe, it's tough to say. Would he be the hardest player to replace from this team? It's really difficult because, Jacob deGrom would be tough to replace in theory, but you didn't really have him, and you won 101 games. Brandon Nimmo, we're going to discuss him tomorrow. There's not a lot of center fielder options out there, but you could get creative because you have Starling Marte, where Marte was in right field based on the inability of Mark Canha and Nimmo at their arms, I believe. Now, I would say Marte should play right field before they even signed him. So I was out ahead of that, and I think we saw he played a great right field, and that really should be his future home. But if you were to go out and get a different right fielder, it just gives you a little more flexibility to replace Nimmo. It's not saying that I think the Mets should let Nimmo go or that they, would have to push Marte in the center if he left because maybe you can get creative. But it just gives you a little more flexibility to replace that player. Just like in some respects, replacing Jacob deGrom is a little bit easier in that you just won all these games without him. I still think the Mets should bring deGrom back, but just trying to weigh out your options here and which guy's the most indispensable. I don't see any viable scenario to replace the best closer in baseball. I just don't. So what you're going to have to do is pony up and pay him, whether that be a 5-year, $100 million contract, a 6-year, 105, whether that is 5 for 90, I think is ideal. If you can get that sign on the dotted line right after this season before free agency and all right, we got Edwin Diaz for the next 5 seasons at $18 million per, I think you take it. And I think that's probably what the initial offer will look like, something in that range. And I hope Edwin is just so happy about the prospect of staying with the Mets and continuing to flourish where he has, so greatly this past season, that he signs on that dotted line and you go into actual free agency having that massive question mark checked off and knowing that your bullpen has a backbone, and then you try to cobble together some other arms around him that makes sense, kind of like you found Ottavino this past season, and he ended up outperforming that contract. And who knows, he might price himself out of New York this offseason as well. But again, tomorrow's show, all about Brandon Nimmo to close out our week as we continue offseason coverage while the playoffs still go on, and the Mets, unfortunately, are not in them. Anyway, that will be all, though, for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan. Locked On MLB is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on in Major League Baseball. You can follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.